here for the walkthrough of the exhibition. Welcome. If you didn't know there was a walkthrough of the exhibition, welcome. We're about to do a walkthrough of the exhibition. My name is Matthew Higgs. I'm the director of White Palms, and it's great to see you all. I just walked past the Tesla store. There's a huge anti-Elon Musk protest happening as we speak, with hundreds of cops. And you can join that after the tour. It's the final day of this exhibition, which is called Looking Back. It's the 15th edition of the White Palms annual exhibition, and it gets curated this year by the artist Elisabeth Kley, who's here with me now, and we're extremely grateful, Elisabeth. I thought I'd just give you a little bit of background to the sort of genealogy and the history of the exhibition, and it's sort of loose curatorial, but quite specific curatorial structure. And then we'll hand over to Elisabeth, and I think you'd be happy to take questions along the way if there are any, of course. So we started the White Palms annual, probably, this is the 15th year it's happened, but it probably started close to 20 years ago. We missed 2 years during the pandemic, and we missed 1 year when we moved to this space because we couldn't guarantee that we had a space to invite someone to do it. But when the exhibition began, it started as a kind of counterpoint to other biennials, and in particular the Whitney Biennial, which obviously takes place at the Whitney Museum, which is now just a block away, and it wasn't at the time. And what I was interested in for the annual was to think about subjectivity, and to think about how we, as individuals, have very subjective relationships with the things that interest us, the world around us, and in this case specifically art. And I feel at least, certainly almost 20 years ago, there was a sort of drift within biennials and triennials there sort of seemed to be a drift towards a kind of objectivity, the idea that these exhibitions should and perhaps even could almost represent everything, which of course is not possible. I certainly think in earlier decades, 90s, 80s, wherever you go, biennials and triennials were much more authored in the sense that they were representative of either the individual or the curatorial teams that put them together. And they explored the subjective relationships. And I was interested also to think about looking at art in New York City, which if you live here, you'll be aware is extremely complicated and overwhelming. I'd say there's at least 200 to 300 galleries that we should probably be engaging with on a regular basis. And of course that's not possible. Unless your job is looking at art, and I can only think of like 3 people who are paid full-time to look at art. So the rest of us, we just have to deal with it. And I was interested in how we deal with it. Where do we go? What do we look at? What routes do we create for ourselves through the art world? What kind of social networks, before social networks, we kind of explored in terms of looking at art? Which galleries programs did we follow? Which galleries programs did we not follow? Which galleries programs did we occasionally dip into, and so on. And just trying to think about how do we navigate the idea of looking at art. So from my perspective, I would say I see between 10 and 20 shows a week. So I'm seeing between 500 and 1,000 shows a year in New York City. I'm certainly not seeing the most shows. There are other people I know who see far more than that. But that's my form of looking. And I organized the first White Palms annual, whenever it was. And it was really, for me, it was just kind of an attempt to sort of make sense of that experience of looking. And from that experience, like, what do you retain? From what you retain, how do you give it meaning, personal meaning? And how do you create relationships between the different things that you've encountered and where you saw them? So the exhibition was really an attempt to restage some of those experiences. So the invitation each year is to someone. We invited Elisabeth last January of 2024, to just make notes during her year of looking. And from that experience, we make an exhibition a year later. So this exhibition consists of the work of 60 plus artists, and all of these objects Elisabeth saw somewhere else in New York City during the last year. And that was also another interesting aspect of the exhibition, because I think that It's probably a truism that if you go to see a show and you see a painting or a sculpture or a photograph or whatever it is on the wall, you might spend 10 seconds with it. You might spend 2 minutes with it. But that might be the last time you ever see it in your entire life. We spend very short amounts of time with individual artworks. So it was also an opportunity for the curator to restage that experience of looking, kind of deja vu, to have an opportunity to see things again. And that's sort of, certainly some of the selections that Elisabeth's made, I saw them in the original context, and I'm happy to see them again, or have an opportunity to see them again. But what I'm most happy about is to see a kind of manifestations of Elisabeth's experience of looking at art, and then beyond that, it's kind of manifestation of Elisabeth's thinking, and then thinking about how that might relate to Elisabeth's practice as an artist, but then also to how Elisabeth shares her looking publicly through her Instagram account. So if you follow Elisabeth on Instagram, I consider it a form of philanthropy, the sharing of what we've seen. So there are all kinds of people that I follow on Instagram who I think are doing an extraordinary service through sharing what they've seen, and it's become a kind of sort of like counter narrative to say the way that art magazines might have operated in decades earlier. There's a kind of authority, I think, to some people's Instagram accounts and the way that they share the experience of looking. A great example would be Walter Robinson, who died very recently. And, I think Walter provided an extraordinary service to all of us by doing the hard work of going to see art. And it is hard work. It's fun, but it's hard work. So anyhow, each year we invite someone very different to organize the show. If you look at the history of this show, it's all on our website. You can look through all the previous 15 annuals to see who organized them. Sometimes it's an artist, sometimes it's a curator, sometimes it's a writer, sometimes it's a team, 2 people. On one occasion it was a collective, which was the Gallery Cleopatra's, the Brooklyn Gallery. It was run by 4 women who organized the show together. And for me, to go back to the original comment, was that I'm very interested in this idea of subjectivity. And it is largely suppressed as a kind of idea these days, that we like things for very specific reasons. And in the most basic sense, the idea was to make an exhibition, unlike, say, the Whitney Biennial, which has other responsibilities, which I understand. The opportunity here is to basically invite someone to make an exhibition of art they like. And it might be no more complicated than that. Apart from what you see on the walls here is extraordinarily complicated. There's a complexity to all of these objects choreographed together in concert with one another. I think it's extraordinarily complex, and it gives us an opportunity to make connections, think about art in ways that perhaps we hadn't before. And over the course of the 15 versions of the annual, I think cumulatively, it tells a completely different story of art of the last 2 decades, to the one that consensus suggests is important, and I think there are counter-narratives to that too. The exhibition is quite a lot of work for White Columns to organize. It's the only time in our calendar year that we show the work of established artists. It's the only time in our calendar year that we show the work of artists who are represented by galleries. It's the only time in the year where we have an opportunity to work with artists that we really would have no clear or obvious reason to work with during the rest of our programs, which are dedicated really to the works of artists who've yet to benefit from critical, curatorial, or commercial support. So in this case, you'll see some very famous, bold-faced names. For example, Robert Mapplethorpe, who made this lamp, and you'll encounter works that you're really not familiar with, but it all coexists. And for us at White Columns, it's an interesting opportunity to do that. Each object represents, I would say, like 5 conversations with 5 different human beings. Elisabeth initially, and the artists themselves if they're alive, the gallery, the people that work at the gallery, the loan forms, the insurance forms, the collection, the shipping, the packing, the condition reports, the return of the works. It's labyrinthinely complicated to put an exhibition like this together. And strangely, that's part of the fun, because it's a collective endeavor. So anyhow, I invited Elisabeth because I like Elisabeth, I like her work, I like how she looks, I like how she shares the process of looking, and we thought she would be an interesting person to make an annual exhibition. This is the biggest annual exhibition in terms of numbers of artists and numbers of works. At some point, we felt like telling Elisabeth to stop, but we didn't quite do that. But I think whoever does it next, we'll have to tell them to stop a little bit. So Elisabeth will obviously talk about her relationship with what you can see today, but I just wanted to start with Elisabeth with a question, which is, you're obviously aware of the annual, and you've seen previous iterations of it. But when we invited you to do the show, was that like a nice call?
It was a surprise.
It was a surprise?
Total surprise, yes.
Why was it a surprise?
Because it was a surprise.
And then once we made the invitation, I mean, what was your initial thought about this?
Sounds like fun.
And can then, you say then perhaps beyond that, say something about, on the one hand, you're just looking, which you do all the time. And then is there a difference when you start thinking about looking in relation to this exhibition? Okay,
yeah.
So maybe you could say something.
Yeah, because you feel, like you really should go to more shows and, just visit more galleries and know more about more artists and open it up. And, you can't just do what you normally do, although I sort of think I did in the end. But, it wasn't hard. I went to galleries, I took pictures, I put them in a folder on the phone. I had a rule. I decided that I would have no friends in the show. So the only person I have in the show that I know is my husband, because I felt like that way all the artists, I know a lot of artists, and nobody's going to feel left out because I didn't pick and choose among my friends. So that was something, and I think it was really about my tastes, and my taste seems to turn, I would say that maybe 75% of the artists in this show are no longer living. So, I like history. And I'm attracted to, which you'll see, I'm attracted to ceramics because I do ceramics. I'm attracted to things that are reflective, shiny, sharp, sort of caged and enclosed, sometimes creepy, S&M tinge, yeah. But, there was definitely some thrills. It was very thrilling to get Wadada Leo Smith in the show, which I saw.
The work here.
The work here. I saw his work and I had never known anything about it, and it was at the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the first shows that they have up there, and he made this book. He's a musician, and he's, kind of jazz, but he has this whole cosmology behind what he's doing, and he makes visual scores that are like paintings, and he makes these books, and he made the book especially for the show. So that was great. And,
grouping behind us because, I think that they're Han Salon style, not just for aesthetic reasons, but there seems to be some kind of intentionality about the relationships between the different objects.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we have the portrait of William S. Burroughs by Gregory Corso.
This is William Burroughs. This is his gun.
Totally amazing. I saw it outside our art fair. And this is an actual piece by William S. Burroughs. And so then William S. Burroughs is very associated with violence, I think. And Nancy Grossman as well, the mask. And she made all those amazing leather heads. And then also Jimmy Wright, the one over there that he was, those were in clubs in the 70s, and this is kind of a bondage S&M thing. Yeah, and Genesis Breyer P. Orridge, who was the most amazingly gutsy person in the universe. And so that was like really great to get a piece by him. Plus I love glitters by her, by them. Because I don't know if anybody knows about them, but Genesis the first thing he did was join a commune, and the commune was such that you weren't supposed to have any individual identity, so that you didn't sleep in the same bed, you didn't wear the same clothes, like all the clothes were in a big box and you picked out from the box, and you had like the bathroom and the bathtub were public. And this was run by a guy named David Medalla in the 60s, I think, who was also a great artist from the Philippines. And then Genesis founded this thing called Home Transmissions, which was sort of outrageous Viennese actionism tinged, very difficult physical performances. And then he went on to have this band called Throbbing Gristle, which was the first industrial rock band. And then after that, he met his wife, like the love of his life, Lady J. Brader. And so they got married and they were in love, and they decided the way to show their love was to see if they could become exactly alike. So they started having surgeries, like he got breast implants, that was the first one, and they kept having surgeries, the whole time that they were together. And then Genesis was no longer him, he was H/ER, or S/HE, and he also felt that, or they felt that they wanted to achieve pandrogyny. Mm-hmm. They wanted to be both male and female at once. They thought that would be like a great improvement in life. So here I was.
So during the year of looking, it was just fortuitous there was a Genesis exhibition during the year.
Actually, it was fortuitous. It wasn't even a Genesis exhibition. It was when I walked into this gallery called Situation/New Discretion, and there was this show with Jerry the Marble Fawn, which is there.
This is on the pedestal,
and he was right here, and
Jerry's here as well.
Vincent Tiley, and so then I saw that, and then in the office they had Benjamin had hung up that particular Genesis, and also the Tommy Schmidt was there in the office. So it was completely fortuitous.
I think one important thing to say about it is that there's no restrictions on where the works could be encountered during the year of looking. So you can see something in the Met, which would be very difficult for us to borrow, because they need a 6 months lead. Yeah. But it could also be in artist studios, in artist homes, in galleries, in public exhibitions. And also, and I think a very significant part of this exhibition is works you encountered at different art fairs.
Yeah.
Which, I think art fairs are somewhat marginalized as perhaps like interesting places to see art, but I find them to often be the most interesting place to see art, because you encounter all kinds of things you just wouldn't necessarily have access to otherwise.
Totally, and I went to Independent 20th Century, Independent, the Outsider Art Fair, the ADAA Art Fair, and the Armory Show, and found something in all of them.
Including this, right?
Yeah, that was at the ADAA in Alice Ordazar's booth, and her name is Maybelle Stamper, and she was a reclusive artist who lived on Captiva Island and preferred to spend time with her cats. And she did these amazing pieces, and I don't know, somehow Ordazar found it.
So I think within a grouping like this, there are obviously you're drawing together existing interests and threads, and then assembling or choreographing these things together on the wall in a way that we might not necessarily have an opportunity to see them again.
I know, and that's another of the great things that I could do in this show, which is very exciting.
And if you don't know Elisabeth's work or her history, Elisabeth also used to be an art critic, and I think that for me is an interesting subtext in this exhibition, what you brought to bear in terms of writing about exhibitions as a critic in public, putting your opinions forth. It seems to me that the exhibition you made is, without being explicitly addressed, is quite opinionated.
Well, it's also because I was writing, like the main part of my writing was writing for Walter Robinson, and he liked tabloid. He liked things that were sensational. And so I had this column, and I would cover 6 shows a month, and drove me crazy because I never would finish the article until like.
This is in the 90s.
This is in the 2000s.
Oh, 2000s. Okay.
Yeah, that I didn't, get the thing ready quickly, which you wanted. So eventually it got discontinued, but I wrote about, extreme performance art and, there was a big Genesis show. I wrote about that. I wrote about Ron Afey. Yeah.
Between drawing and ceramics, and ceramic sculpture, and there are elements of those interests in this show, but not explicitly or overtly so.
Well, got some ceramics in.
Huh?
Yeah. This piece was amazing. There was a show at Peter Freeman, and it was about a workplace or a workshop that this guy started in Germany that a lot of artists had made ceramics in. So I took two. This one's by Herbert Prangenberg, and there's another one over there by Otto Penne, and I took two from that show. And yeah, this one is very attractive because it's kind of like, it's very rich, the glazes are very rich. It's also sort of like the wall of the cave. Relates to a couple of the other pieces around here.
This is a stressful nightmare to install and take
Oh,
out of its frame.
I had no idea I forgot it was so big.
I'd say that was the most stressful 2 hours in the putting together of this exhibition.
Yeah, they were on the floor trying to slide it out of its box without, hurting anything. And it was, it's very heavy and very fragile too.
So a question for me, because I did this when I organized an annual exhibition, is that, one sees a lot of art. And I certainly, when I organized the show, felt my show could have been 5 times as big. How did you begin the process of self-editing?
Well, I edited, I took pictures at all the shows, and then before we had our meeting, I definitely edited it. There were actually a lot more. I just thought, what fit in and what didn't quite fit in. I took out the ones that I felt really didn't fit in. And then I arrived at the meeting with my phone and my 80 pictures, and I thought, well, we'll all sit down and edit it some more, and we didn't.
We just said yes to everything, right?
So that was a surprise, but fortunately most of the things were pretty small.
But that's one thing I was interested to ask you, because there are a number of larger objects in the show, but not many. And I wonder whether this idea of a domestically scaled artwork was something you gravitated to during your year of looking, or was it something that you had in mind when thinking about how can you include 70 plus artists in a relatively small
I think
space?
it's things that I gravitated to, because I don't think that I was clearly thinking how many I wanted in here. I didn't worry about that until we had our meeting.
Because I'd say it's since we moved into this space 6 years ago, whenever it was before the pandemic, that the 3 annuals that have taken place in this space, curated by Randy Kennedy, Olivia Shaw, and Lee Mary Manning, a consistent thread through the exhibitions, although they were completely different in terms of their tone, is that there were a lot of smaller things. Whereas somebody could have easily just chosen 10 large things, and that would
it seemed like that was more the style in the beginning of the annual.
Right. I also felt like maybe it's there's a lot of the more interesting galleries, or very interesting galleries, quite small storefront spaces that don't, and they
I love small galleries.
Post pandemic,
Sure.
a lot of artists seem to be, from my experience, working on a smaller scale because trying to make large work in New York to paint is expensive.
Exactly. The studio costs a fortune.
Were there any things that you couldn't get that fell through?
There was I really wanted Tiona Nekia McLeod, and there was this great show at Hauser and Wirth. It was a group show, and that's why there's a gala in there here. And I also asked for this mesh mask that she made, and I have a feeling I wasn't going to get it because it was made of gold. She justifiably said it wasn't the context for her, so that went out. And then there was the white asshole that I had actually seen in 23. So by the white asshole by King Cobra that had gotten disqualified. I would love to have that. And there was a very interesting Turkish artist that I saw at the Armory show, but I think it was too complicated. Those are the 3 that I remember the most. And also, there was an embroidery by this artist named Sal Salandre that my friend Tony Cox shows, And it was a very perfect, I wanted to show it with the burros, and it was a guy in a leather outfit with a bunch of S&M tools on the wall behind him. But unfortunately, the artist didn't want to do it, so he didn't come in. So those are the ones I remember.
And just to remind the rules, or the rules such as they are, the parameters for the exhibition, which we ask everybody to try to stick to, is that the work has to have been seen in New York. Has to have been seen between January 1st and December 31st in a calendar year, and that's the only rule.
So I could have tried to do a studio visit with King Cobra, but I think I was a little too shy.
To see the work again,
yeah,
in order to include it.
Yeah.
When Jay Sanders, who's now the director of Artist Space, at the time he was working at Green and Valley organized the show, he included a work by Terry Chimes from Philadelphia that he'd seen in Philadelphia, and for some reason we let him get away with it. That was the only.
Well, he deserves to get away with it. He's such a good curator.
He used to call Philly like the sixth part of New York.
Yeah.
It's today's apartment. Anyhow, let's go through into this room. As Elisabeth mentioned at the beginning, one of her rules that she created for herself was to include none of her friends. And I think you're the first person to ever formally address or acknowledge that. Whereas, I think in other annuals, there were definitely artists who have strong connections, let's say, to the curator. And in this instance, it's your husband. So I thought we'd have an opportunity to talk about your husband's work.
Yeah.
This was a great show that was at Canada Gallery in their second space, which is across the street from their main space. And it's also worth, just for the kind of Nepo baby context, to say that Elizabeth's represented by Canada Gallery.
Yeah, they did a show with him, which was completely great because my husband is very antisocial. He mostly goes to the studio, goes swimming, and comes home. That's it. And then he periodically complains that why doesn't he have anybody selling his work? And I say, well, you got to get out of the studio, you don't see anybody. But Sarah saw it and she loved it. And
Sarah's one of the directors and founders of
so
Canada.
they actually bought this painting and they did the show and it was fantastic. And I figured, I love this painting so much, and I just thought that that's probably the acme of his career, so might as well.
Hopefully not, right?
I don't know. He's very, very eccentric, and at the moment this is a man who did figurative paintings, like as long as I've known him, he's been against abstract painting. I mean, another thing is that he's Japanese, so his English isn't that great, so that probably plays into his being so reclusive. But anyway, he just never could understand why anybody did any abstract painting. And now, suddenly, after this show, he's making abstract painting. Who knows what he's going to come with in a couple more years. I just love that painting.
Another thing I wanted to pick up on was that, you visiting fairs during this year, and whilst you're at those fairs, including the Outsider Art Fair, which is on this weekend, everybody I encourage you to go. It's one of the best editions that I've ever seen. A lot of the work that you've selected, but I think also it's true of the previous three annuals here, falls into kind of a loose category that I would put kind of maverick artists, which would include folk art, sculptural artists, so-called outsider art, some kinds of forms of vernacular art, whatever the terminology might be. But it seems to me that's also something that you are very interested in.
Yeah, I'm definitely attracted.
But then you also made a point of punctuating throughout the show. There are works of self-taught art. A great example being the one above your husband's painting.
Lady Shalimar Montague.
Which is Lady Shalimar Montague, who lived in a retirement home in Coney Island and made these extraordinary drawings at the end of her life. I think she only started making work in the 70s.
Yeah, I think so.
And she claimed, as a younger woman, she danced on all the great stages in Europe as a dancer ballerina. And I think it turns out that she'd never left the United States. So she sort of had a vicarious youth through her art towards the end of her life. And Kerry Schuss, the dealer in Tribeca, was one of the first people to support her and present her work.
Yeah. He's very good at finding people like that.
But could you say something about that interest in, even, your husband might almost
Yeah.
split into the Maverick category, but can you say how that idea is manifest here in your thinking?
I'm just attracted to it. There's this. There's there's quite a few kind of Maverick things. It's admirable, and it's great to look at generally, and it doesn't follow the rules that other art seems bound by.
Okay, we'll go into the last room and then we'll happily take it. It's also true to say, I think it's the only exhibition that occupies all of White Palm's spaces. So if you come to White Palms on a regular or semi-regular or irregular basis, you'll know that we tend to do 2 or 3 projects simultaneously. We're just going to get Elisabeth some water. So also the exhibition is the only exhibition that occupies all of our spaces. I know that you wanted to talk about the Tarworks painting.
Yes, Tarworks painting, because Tarwork is here. And they had a beautiful show at Matthew Brown, and I picked out a drawing, and then the drawing was not available, so they said, well, you could have these drawings, or you could come for a studio visit. And it turned out that their studio was actually about 15 minutes walk from my studio. And so I went in there, and I couldn't believe it that there were so many small paintings. I was so excited because the paintings that were in the show were enormous. And, I love it. It's so Eastern European and so romantic and kind of creepy and twisted. And yeah, it's great. And they paint them together, husband and wife. And that, to me, is totally amazing. 2 people painting on one painting.
Are you going to be collaborating with your husband?
No.
You might know. I mean, I think it's also, it, from my memory at least, of the exhibition series over the last 20 years, the annual series, it's the only instance I can think of where somebody went and did a studio visit, a selected work from a studio visit, even though that is a completely normal thing for curators to do within their normal business.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, nobody else went on studio visit?
To the best of my knowledge, I can't think of anyone who did that. I might be forgetting. Right.
Yeah, I didn't. This was just happenstance, and I didn't. Otherwise, I didn't go on studio visits. I saw enough without doing on studio visits.
And now the exhibition's happened. It's about to end today at 6 o'clock. Exiting this process. Are there any new thoughts, or did you learn anything?
I learned what it was like to see all these pieces that I loved all together repeatedly. That was really great. It's like collecting without having to spend any money, and without having to have a space to hang stuff up in. And yeah, I think so. And I don't know,
Has it drifted into your work or
Maybe
studio
it
or
will.
thinking in any way?
Maybe it will, but I think it's too soon to tell.
Right.
And my work is kind of focused, doesn't really reach out in a lot of different directions. So that, I guess, was also what made this so much fun. And, also what makes it fun to see shows in general and stick them on Instagram.
And in the 2 months of this year that have, passed, obviously it's a turbulent time. Have you seen less art in January and February than you did last January, February?
Oh, for sure. I'm giving myself a break. But I have seen some art already. You can't help it. But
Well, you can. Your husband manages.
yes, this is true. He doesn't go to see anything. He stopped going to the museums. He used to go to the museum. No. Yeah. Yes, it's true. You can live in New York like you're in a small town far away from everything, if you want.
Other questions for Elisabeth about specific works, about her process, about anything in general? For me, for White Columns, about the structure, the nature of the exhibition, the history of the exhibition? We'd be happy to try and take them.
Can you talk about the Martin Wong piece that you showed?
Martin Wong? Yeah, that was,
It's a drawing in the far gallery, close to the gallery's reception desk, if you have an opportunity to go back.
that was from a show curated by my friend Paul P. and it was at POW. It was the two of them drawing. And actually, I had asked for something much more innocuous, was a butterfly. And they didn't have the butterfly. So they offered that piece, and I thought, wow, this is so much better because it's, kind of echoes like that whole wall is sort of the wall of ephemerality and death and sadness. And, so there's a person stretched out on the bed, almost like a corpse, looking up at the TV set, which has another head. So there are the two heads that are bouncing off each other, and then the gun hanging on the wall. It's like the Burns gun hanging on the wall. So, yeah.
So it sounds like when you were either assembling this as notes on your phone or installing it in the exhibition itself, there were kind of themes. So this is like the death
Yeah, well,
ball.
that one
Then we had just saw the S&M sex ball. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had I actually had the golub with the heads, and then, I looked at it and I said, no, this golub is much too tender, it's this sad woman, and it goes with the other, like, quiet word. So I switched that, and yeah, there was definitely things that went together, like kind of metallic, sharp things, and then there was the wall with the Norbert Prangenberg, and the one by Carrie Young where there's the hands and the feet, which is the photograph in the police station where somebody would stand and put their hands and their feet and get frisked. And then the piece by, oh God, what's her name? The ones, it's like little cages. So, and then the coyote, which is also, sharp, and then the Cameron Martin, which is, like, as always with his work, it's really disturbing and brilliant because it's about it's what it is in the little booklet is a list of all the plots of land that are owned by Dia, and then the thinking behind it is that property law and real estate law was created in the times of slavery, and the land, all the land, the slaves were not allowed to have funerals or be buried in cemeteries, so they were just buried anywhere, and all the land around there was, at the time of slavery, was owned by slave owners and slave traders, and often when real estate is developed, they find the bones, the bodies of slaves. So that, is like saying that all this land has this history.
Cameron's work is the small
It's just on the table there.
booklet on the little
Yeah.
table just off the side in the main space, and you can actually buy the booklet, I think, for $10.
$10, yeah.
And I think it's also interesting that, really, a project like Cameron's could then also somehow be accommodated within the narrative of a large, sprawling group show as well.
Yeah, and, it's kind of interesting that it was okay that they agreed to do it, because it's really a super serious work. I mean, it's probably the most serious thing in the show, but.
In terms of next year, we've already invited the person to do it next year. We never announce it until it's the time of the show, so it's not like a secret. It's just that we want that person to go about their business unbothered. And for us, that's, as an organization, that's an interesting process as well, thinking about who, because we see it as a cumulative. So if you look at the history of the people that have done this exhibition and you put them all in a room together, I think it'd be a really interesting conversation. And it's people that we know are looking. It's people we see a lot when we're out and about. It's people who we know that are actually looking harder than us. And we're really excited about next year's iteration of this show. And, I think Jerry Salt's made a kind of very nice,
Yes, very nice.
little response to this show in New York Magazine, sort of saying, I think the sort of gist of his short text was that there's no thesis to this exhibition. So there's no curatorial narrative in front of the work. It's rather that the thesis, such as it is, emerges from the work.
Yeah, which is totally true, because I really didn't think about anything except for that I liked it, And so now, like over the months, I'm starting to see the relationships between the work more than I did when we first installed it.
But that's what interests me, I think, in the beginning of this idea is that even though you said you didn't think about that kind of idea, like a curatorial thesis,
Right.
but what you are stuck with is your subjectivity
Yes,
and your history
yeah, which I,
and your prejudices and your tastes
Yeah.
and the things that you gravitate to and the things that you move away from and all of that
all
then
that stuff
manifests
that
in
I
this.
completely embrace, yeah.
Yeah. But, which I think to some degree is we're not supposed to be embarrassed about, but we're supposed to temper. Well,
Yeah.
there's often a sort of suggestion that we should temper those
Right,
things.
yeah. I think especially in a museum or something where you're supposed to equitably represent a lot.
Although the history of the Whitney Biennial is very interesting too. It used to be a lot of the iterations or additions, subsequent editions of that show were hyper-subjective.
Yes.
And were criticized accordingly or celebrated accordingly. Any additional questions?
I don't have a question, but I noticed that the works are hung low. No comment.
I have to say that while I, arranged some groupings and had a lot to say about what went next to each other, Matthew was the authority on how high it should be, how far apart it should be.
I'm not saying any judgment.
No,
But
sure.
but I think that's good. It should
It's a
be
good
low.
observation.
It should be low.
Because we tend to hang things lower
Yeah.
than you might see at
Right.
Hounsworth moment. That's true.
Yeah.
And
We hang it like a 58 cent or below. I don't know. I like it. I think it's very human.
I like it.
Human relationship with objects.
Mhm.
And sometimes there's personally speaking, sometimes there's some intimidating sort of distance relationship with something's too high.
Mhm.
But also I think that the nature of a lot of the works that Elisabeth selected are quite intimate. Not just in terms of what's available to look at, but also I think in their intentions. There's a kind of an aspiration towards kind of closeness. You see it, say, in Zena Hall's embroidery piece over here, where almost like every stitch is significant, and an opportunity to sort of have that entirely within your field of vision or frame of vision. Seems to me like
That's
an
very
interesting
interesting.
thought. We never asked the guest curators or selectors to write the statement about the show.
Thank God.
We've been interested to hear about what Elisabeth had to say about this because she was a great writer, but we didn't want to put the pressure on an individual to sort of explain what this might be. And I think only two, maybe one or two people have ever done that. One was Randy Kennedy, right?
Randy and Lee.
Randy and Lee Mary Manning. Only two people in 15 editions of the show have written something for the show that accompanies the press release, and nobody in 18 years has ever noticed that the press release never changes. It's exactly the same every year. We just put Elisabeth's name into it. Not a single word's changed. So for us, that's a gift because no one likes writing press releases, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel every year because the wheel's perfectly formed. Additional questions? Happy to take them.
I was going to ask about how did you say their name?
Coyote.
Coyote Ojo,
Yeah, the dress.
That was the work that was originally shown at 52 Walker.
52 Walker.
Yeah, in a solo show that Coyote had, just to give context of where it was originally seen.
He sources everything from the internet, and he the dress is used, and there's a hair on it, and he just assembles them without glue, into these spooky kind of personages, or that one. Sometimes they're personages, sometimes they're something else, but they're always like shiny, sharp materials.
It almost does look like music is going to be coming out of it with the disco and the music.
So I think an equally interesting part of the exhibition, which isn't really sort of articulated or necessarily even accessible, is that all of these objects had a prior context in New York in the previous year. So this was, for example, shown in the front space at Andrew Krepp's gallery. As we discussed, this artwork was seen in a studio space, and so on. And I think that sort of the way that artworks move between contexts and how our ideas about those artworks shift. adjust in that process too is interesting as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to have the Frederick Bear saw next to the Xena Hall.
Yeah.
Those hanging pictures.
And the Xena Hall, Xena's an artist who works at Creative Growth Art Center in Oakland, California, which is the preeminent center for artists with disabilities in America. And I believe this work you saw the
I saw
Independent Art Fair
yeah.
in the booth of Creative Growth. And, for me at least, it's an opportunity here to see the work, because if you saw the work in the booth was very kind of claustrophobic and tight. And it's certainly an art fair, you don't really have an opportunity for extended looking.
Yeah.
So it's been great to have the work here for 2 months. And Xena came from Oakland last week to see the work in situ herself, which was great.
Yeah, it's really great. And it really repays a lot of looking.
If Elizabeth's obviously here, I'm here. If you want to say something more informally, that's totally fine. But we'd like to thank you, Elizabeth, again for a year of looking.
Thank you.
It's an amazing pleasure working with you on this. It was really fun installing it. It's been great having the show on view and sharing it with all kinds of people, and we're going to miss it. And we're going to miss you. You can come and hang out as often as you like. And thank you for coming today. It's really appreciated. We know there's an awful lot of things to see in New York, so we appreciate you coming to see us. And then go join the Elon Musk protest around the corner.
Oh.